Okay, boys and girls, it's time for another episode of What the Fuck Is He Doing in His Garage at Midnight on Saturday while the rest of us are drinking, smoking dope, banging strippers, whatever the fuck it is you guys do for fun on Saturday. This is what I do for fun. So, I pulled up a drive file from, I think it was Texas 2K Roll Race. I'm not sure. It just said Roll Race Big Bump. And the reason I brought that up is that for those of you who watched the earlier video, you might have been surprised at how little action there was on a drive file from a drag race event. This one had a really big bump in it on the roll down after the end of the event, and I thought it was kind of interesting, so I pulled it from the data and fed it in the machine to watch it go. So I'm going to click all the appropriate buttons, and you can watch what happens to the front of a GTR on a bumpy airport track. So it's going to perform a gas test at 5 different points so that it can determine what the gas force is and separate it from the damping force when it does the test. So it's going to check it from both directions. It'll stop 10 times and then integrate that into the rest of the profile. Anyway, here we go. This is the roll part. Plenty of bumps, as you can see. Now he's on the throttle, the nose is lifted. After he gets off the throttle, you see that big bump. And I didn't bother to check the speed. It looked like it happened sometime in 4th gear as he was rolling down. So it had to have been at least over 100 miles an hour. And there's some interesting things about that bump, or at least interesting to me. The first is that it ended up using about 1.75 inches of damper travel, so that's a pretty damn gnarly bump to launch the wheel that far up into the body. And the damping force at the highest velocity point of the bump was 2,600 pounds of damping force. The damper was fighting back that hard to keep the wheel from getting jammed up into the body. And we had a 1,000 pound per inch front spring in the car at the time, and so the difference in spring force between the low point and the high point of that bump was about 1,750 pounds. So if you look at the relative forces between the damper and the spring, you can get a feel for what was going on there, and hopefully realize that in this case the compression damping was doing a tremendous amount of work to limit the wheel travel as opposed to what the spring was doing itself. And so because the Nissan GTR has such a shitty motion ratio at the front, which is 1.68, those numbers work out very differently at the wheel. And so the car used about 3 inches of compression travel to deal with that bump, which was considerable. That was more than I had expected, and had I known it was going to be that extreme, I may have chosen a different spring rate and a different damping ratio, but that's what I ended up with, and it was a little bit wrong. Didn't hurt anything, but still it was not what I expected. So about 3 inches at the wheel is what that bump did to the front of the car. In terms of damping force, after we take into account the loss of leverage because of the motion ratio, it was about 1,500 pounds of damping force at the wheel. So again, 1,500 pounds, fighting back against the force trying to shove the wheel up into the body, which is equivalent to about 1.25 G's, by the way. So that was a pretty big hit. Spring force works out to about let's see here. I didn't figure that out ahead of time. About 0.83 G's. That would have been about 1,000 pounds at the wheel. And so the difference between the spring force in the static position and at the top of the bump, or the peak of the hit, is about 1,000 pounds force, which is equivalent to about 0.83 G's. And as a point of interest, auto manufacturers will typically target combined spring and bump rubber force to handle anywhere from 2 to 2.5 G's. So compared to the stock vehicle, you can see what we've done here is to handle the majority of the hit with damping as opposed to spring rate. Of course, the bump rubbers are included in the spring rate. And the reason for that is that it's a much more linear control of the situation, rather than letting the wheel initially attain a high velocity before it runs into the very high rate bump rubbers. we like to handle it right off the bat with compression damping, so that the jerk, for those of you who are not physics geeks, well, actually there's no easy way to put this. Jerk is a derivative of acceleration. It's a measure of how abrupt the acceleration is. So the short story is, dealing with this big hit with a substantial amount of compression damping, as opposed to a very progressive spring rate, results in a lesser value of jerk, which is much nicer for the tire and the driver. And I think, yeah, that's probably all I want to say about that. I don't think it gets much more interesting from there. But there is one really cool thing here I'd like to show you. And this is a testament to, hang on a moment here. Get rid of this. I don't need to save that file. So this graph shows the displacement of the damper over time during that run, and you can see the big hit down here. And Rohrig, the company that originally designed this dynamometer, and a company called Carolina Test Works, who calibrated this for me and upgraded it and did a bunch of other wonderful things, have got this working so well that on this big hit that's happening at a rate of speed that your eyes can hardly even pick up on, has an error in displacement of, let's see here, 105, in the neighborhood of 10,000ths of an inch. So as this system is trying to simulate what happens on the track, we take this ridiculously big hit. I mean, look at that line. It's nearly vertical. The wheel or the damper position goes from minus 9/10 of an inch to over an inch in a matter of milliseconds, and this machine tracks that so closely that at the very peak, the overshoot is no more than 10,000ths of an inch, which is really completely insignificant in the world of dampers on 3,900-pound race cars. So anyway, that's what's happening in my garage at midnight, and I'm pretty sure it's better than drinking and smoking dope and banging strippers and whatever the fuck it is that you're up to. So that's it. Have a good night. What's left of it.